Hi everyone, so today I have volume 8 of Nanatsu Taizai, also known as the 7 Deadly Sins. On the front cover we have Meliodas, Elizabeth, Ban, King, Diane and Gufa. On the side we have Gufa, and on the back we have artwork of Hawkspawn, or the bull hat. So let's see what's underneath this jacket cover. We have some artwork of Gilfunder when he was young. The side is still Gufa and the back is still the same. Let's look inside. Volume 8 contains chapter 55 to 62, and this volume does include an extra or side chapter at the end of it. Just a quick reminder on the events towards the end of the last volume. Dawn Rule, an elite group of holy knights, were attacking Gufa, the armored giant, in the forest near the village of Ordan. Meliodas and his group are trying to defend Gufa as well as save a kid named Pelio from harm's way. And the fight goes on until Dawn Roar is about to give a final death blow to the armored giant. However, the attack is stopped by a young man who we've believed was an attendant of Pelio, and his name was Armando, but in fact his true identity was the Sin of Lost, Gufa. So that means that the person in the armor is not in fact Gufa, but something else, someone else, and we'll find out in these next chapters who's in the armor. So, chapter 55. This young man has just identified himself as Gufa. Dawn Roar think he's kidding, he is just joking. But the person who shot his arrow to give the final death blow to the armored giant tells that this young man stopped it with his bare hands. And this confirms to them that this person is in fact Gufa. Here, Ban walks up to Gufa and he tells Gufa that he thought that Gufa was an old man underneath the armor. At this point here, Gufa recognizes Ban, but he is surprised to see that Meliodas has not aged at all in 10 years. Not only that, but he finds it hard to believe that this kid is king. However, he quickly changes his mind when King changes into his other form. Freda, he is the leader of Dawn Roar. He is excited to meet the 7 Deadly Sins, but says that they are there for the armored giant's head. Here we have a few flashbacks of Gufa when he first arrived in the forest. He was still in his armor. However, he saw this creature and somehow ended up with Gufa's armor. Gufa concludes that a three-way battle between Dawn Roar, this armored giant, and the 7 Deadly Sins would destroy the village of Ordan. So what he does is he himself removes the head of the armored giant and he gives it to Freda. Freda accepts the offer, and as his group leaves, he warns the Seven Deadly Sins that if his mission was in fact to defeat and kill the Seven Deadly Sins, he will, even though he respects them to a certain degree. King then tells Gufa that he's surprised that he decapitated this armored giant, as King thought that Gufa was sympathizing with the armored giant, which actually turned out to be a monster inside the armor. Meliodas doesn't recognize the monster. He's never seen a monster like that. And this monster, even though it's decapitated, gets up. Gufa then tells the group that this monster was most likely a human once, which does shock them. But not only that, but this monster was in fact once a holy knight. Chapter 56. Gufa explains that he forced the monster inside his armor in order to tame it or constrain its power, as Gufa's armor, it has some kind of magical properties. He leaves the monster to Meliodas, Ban and King while he takes Pelio out of the battlefield and to safety. So the three sins are fighting the monster, and this monster is quite powerful as it knocks them away a few times. Blows that Meliodas and Ban are doing do not seem to have any effect on it. Now we go to Pelio and Gufa. And Pelio wakes up and Gufa tells him to leave the area since it's too dangerous for him. And Gufa does mention that he is going to fight the monster with all his power. So far, Meliodas and Ban have been fighting barehanded, but realise that this opponent is quite strong. So they can't defeat him without any weapons. So they pick up weapons left from the dead Holy Knights. If you remember, a group of Holy Knights went to the forest in order to kill the armored giant, but instead were killed themselves. So Meliodas and Ban take some of their weapons, and here we see Meliodas' ability with the sword, and he uses a technique called Hellblaze, which is the same technique he used on Ban that gave him the scar on his neck. Right here, when Meliodas is about to give a final blow, he hears a voice and he sees a figure among this mass of flesh, and he hesitates. This causes Meliodas to get caught by the monster, but he is rescued by Gufa. Right here, Ban and Meliodas are arguing, as Meliodas refuses to kill the armored giant, knowing that the Holy Knight is still alive. Remember, Meliodas saw a figure in the mass of flesh, and Meliodas concluded that the Holy Knight is still alive and was somehow still in there, basically. So, after giving this blow here, Gufa shows up and he tells them that he used his ability at invasion, which kind of gives the opponent some kind of hallucination or puts them in a trance. It's almost like Naruto's Genjutsu, you could say. Going back to Bullhat, Diana and Elizabeth are worried about the others. And then Elizabeth hears a knock on the door of the Bullhat. Elizabeth goes down to serve the guest, who turns out to be Cain. And Cain is so shocked from seeing Elizabeth and he calls her Liz. So what kind of connection do they have? Has Cain met Elizabeth before? I guess we'll find out in the next chapter. So that's chapter 57. Oh, it's right here that Guffa actually explains his ability in invasion and how it's some kind of hallucination, or as I said before, like some kind of genjutsu. Anyway, right here we have Ban, and he wants to give this monster a deadly blow, but he is stopped by Meliodas. Meliodas does not want to kill, but instead save this holy knight. But Ban refuses, and he literally rips out the heart of this holy knight using this kind of whip. Now going back to the ball hat, Elizabeth lets Cain in and he serves him a drink. Well, Cain explains to Elizabeth why he called her Liz. And the reason is because Elizabeth looks like someone he once knew, called Liz, who turns out to be in fact Meliodas' lover. Some flashback happens, and it's basically Cain explaining in detail. And we find out here that Meliodas was in fact the leader of the Holy Knights back in the kingdom of Danafor. And Cain explains how Liz and Meliodas met, how they became friends, how Liz became accepted as a Holy Knight in Danafor, as we find out at the beginning of this flashback that Liz was initially an enemy combatant who was captured, and Meliodas somehow prevented her from being executed or sold off or something like that, and he changed her as a person, made her stronger, and she became a holy knight in this kingdom of Danafor. Cain also goes on to explain why Meliodas does not use a sword, why he prefers to fight barehanded. And the reason is because Meliodas is so powerful that if he used a sword, he would kill nearly every opponent he fought. And he did not want that. Meliodas even refused a gift from his lover Liz. At this point, Cain shows Elizabeth this sword, which was the gift Liz wanted to give to Meliodas, in which he refused. Right, now we go back to Meliodas and the group. And Meliodas is quite cross with Ban for killing this holy knight, ripping the heart out of him. Now we go into this hallucination that this holy knight is having due to Guffa's ability, and we see him talking to his children. And his child turns out to be Gila. Guffa's ability wears off, and this monster goes berserk. So even though Ban ripped out its heart, it's still alive. At this point, Ban realizes that this monster is in fact a demon. If you remember from the side story, demons have been shown to have more than one heart. Now we go back to Elizabeth, who hears the roar of this monster. He takes a hold of Liz's sword and he runs towards Meliodas' location. Chapter 58. Now going back to Meliodas and the group, and they recognize the Holy Knight as Dotting Dale. He was a Holy Knight who recognized, admired, and respected the seven deadly sins. And here we see how Guffa used his armor to seal or constrain this monster. Ban, as well as the other members of the Seven Deadly Sin, are trying to kill this monster. But Meliodas doesn't want them to kill him and keeps getting in their way. Of course, Ban calls Meliodas naive, that there's no other way to stop this monster, and he says that by killing it, it'll be given some release to Del so that he can move on finally. Meliodas disagrees completely, that is, until Elizabeth shows up. She throws a sword, which is the sword that Meliodas got from Elizabeth. And Elizabeth tells him that Liz didn't want him to keep fighting. He wanted to use the sword in order to keep living. And Elizabeth tells Meliodas that she will share his sin, whatever it may be. Meliodas takes the sword and he kills this monster. So it shows that Meliodas had some kind of change of heart, took what Elizabeth said seriously. Anyway, so after he killed this monster, he killed Del. He apologizes to everyone. Now King and Meliodas are wondering, how did Del become this monster? Was he cursed? Did someone put a spell on him? And they wonder if this was the Holy Knight's plan to resurrect the Demon Clan. Meliodas then tells everyone that the new enemy is not just the Holy Knights, but some other force as well. While Meliodas was talking to them, Ban found a strange kind of plant attached to Del's body. It tried to attack him, but he easily crushed it. So we can assume that it was this kind of weird plant that caused Del to become this kind of grotesque monster. This chapter ends with Meliodas thanking Elizabeth for giving Liz a sword. Chapter 59. Guffa's formal introductions are made to everyone. And the party begins. Now they have assembled 5 members of the 7 Deadly Sins. Here we have Elizabeth requesting Guffa's help, and that she was pleased to meet him. But Guffa says no. Everyone's shocked by this. But he tells Elizabeth that it is in fact not their first time meeting, and it's revealed that the 7 Deadly Sins have met Elizabeth before, when she was much younger. Meliodas asked Guffa whether he will join them on their quest, and Guffa does reply that he was appointed by the king as a member of the Sins, and he has no reason to refuse a request by the princess. So the party begins, everyone's having fun. And Meliodas approaches Guffa and asks Guffa if he remembered or if he knew what really happened 10 years ago when they were framed for the murder of the Great Holy Knight. Guffa replies that he doesn't know who framed them, but he tells Meliodas that the person who knocked out Meliodas when the 7 Deadly Sins were escaping Leonis was in fact another member of the 7 Deadly Sins called Merlin. story continues with the group just having some fun, taking the mick out of one another, with Gufa commentating on King's odour, Diane's height and weight, and Ban's using his ability snatch inappropriately. So they're all having fun, and Miliadas points out to Gufa that Pelio was close by and tells Gufa to go and talk to him. Pelio hugs Gufa and tells him to come back, tells Armando to come back. But Gufa tells him that Armando never really existed. And everything about Armando, his personality, his looks, he manipulated it in order to make Pelio happy. He based his personality on a travelling musician that made Pelio happy when he was younger, and he based his hairstyle on Pelio's deceased mother, so he would feel some sort of comfort being around him. Of course, Pelio is upset by this, and he even tells Gufa that he will one day become a holy knight and capture him. And in a way, I guess this makes Gufa happy, as he says, okay, that means one day we'll see each other again. Back at Leones, Dawn Raw delivered the head of the armored knight to Helbram, and Helbram tosses the head out the window and orders Gila to destroy it, without even knowing that she just destroyed a part of her father. That takes us on to chapter 60. We're still at Leones, and Dreyfus has finally appeared after grieving for his dead son, Greymore. If you remember, Greymore was the holy knight that attended to Princess Veronica, and it was reported that both of them had died. Anyway, so Dreyfus appears, and Hauser informs this great holy knight of the increasing power of the new generation, both in strength, size, and how Hendrickson's group was getting larger and larger. Of course, Dreyfus, as a great holy knight himself, cannot let this go by, and he says here that he has to have a long conversation with Hendrickson. Now we go to Gilfunder, and he goes to visit Princess Margaret, who's locked up in the dungeon, and he tells her that her sister, Princess Veronica, is dead. Now we're still in Leones, but we're with Jericho and Gila now, and they're sparring, and during the spar, Gila notices that Jericho is somewhat distracted, and she asks her what's wrong. And we find out that Jericho followed Dawn Raw when they were ordered to kill the armored knight, and she witnessed the Seven Deadly Sins attacking this monster. And after they had killed it and buried the body, she dug up a pendant which she gave to Gila, and we see that Gila actually recognizes this pendant, so we can assume that she realized that this monster turned out to be her father. Now we move to another place in Leones where Hendrickson is with Helbram, and they're trying to break the seal of the demon clan. However, they are unsuccessful, as it is mentioned that they do not have all the pieces in order to fully resurrect the demon clan. Now we finally go back to the Boar Hat, and Meliodas tells the group that they have to infiltrate Leones and retrieve his sword, to which the group refuse, saying that it was his responsibility that he lost his sword, so really he should go and get it himself. That takes us on to chapter 61. Meliodas explains that the hilt of his broken sword, which was taken by Helbram, is something of a relic for a ritual called the Coughing of Eternal Darkness. And he goes on to say that the Goddess clan, the Fairy clan, and the humans united to defeat and seal the Demon clan. And he believes that the Holy Knight's goal, or what we can guess is Hendrickson's goal, is to resurrect the Demon clan by breaking the seal. Now we go back to Leones, and the two great holy knights, Hendrickson and Dreyfus, are having a conversation. This is a conversation where Dreyfus is asking Hendrickson for an explanation on why his increasing the numbers of new generation of holy knights, and he explains to Dreyfus that he's preparing for the holy war. And we find out that the people who really killed the great holy knight and framed the 7 deadly sins for it were in fact Hendrickson and Dreyfus. Now we go back to the Boar Hat. Meliodas wonders why the Holy Knights wanted Elizabeth. At that point, a Holy Knight appears out of nowhere and says that Elizabeth is the last key in releasing the seal. This Holy Knight teleports to Elizabeth and teleports away. Meliodas runs out of the Boar Hat, looks for them, but it seems like the Holy Knight took Elizabeth back to Leones. As Leones is very far away from their current location, Meliodas asks Diane for a favour. Ban decides to tag along, and so does Guffa. Diane picks up the three and basically, like a javelin, she throws them in the direction of Leones. And this chapter ends with the capital detecting 3 powerful entities heading towards them. Chapter 62. The Great Holy Knights inform and mobilize their troops, and this mobilizing of troops does scare some of the citizens of Leones. The Sins land in Leones and they start their assault. Meliodas on his own, using his ability Full Counter, mows down most of the enemies single-handedly. And this continues until the Sins, as well as the 2 great holy knights, sense a great power from the south. Then a soldier reports to the 2 great holy knights that a massive army was approaching from the south, and whose leader is the King of Camelot, King Arthur. And that's the last chapter. Now we go on to the extra or side story. And this special chapter follows Gufa as he searches for a room in which to sleep in. He first visits where Hawk is staying. Eventually he goes to the room where Elizabeth is sleeping, and Milides happens to be there. He tells Gufa that he is protecting her, although he's completely tied up. Next he goes to the room where Ban and King are staying, and we can see that Ban is sleeping on the bed while King has this kind of hammock. And Gufa asks King why he chooses to sleep on a hammock, and he tells Gufa to watch the stars. He loves to see the stars. And what we really see when we look out at the window is Diane. Anyway, continuing on, Gufa eventually finds a room, which is the storage room on the highest level of the Boar Hat, and it contains a few books which keeps Gufa occupied. When morning comes, Gufa's personality seems to have changed, and Milides points out that Gufa is kind of acting or playing with himself, as he is really, well, what he's really doing is acting out scenes probably from the books he read. Yeah, that's where this volume ends. Some fan artwork. There we go. Okay everyone, thanks for watching. Please comment, like, subscribe. Bye.